The house was quiet when I arrived. The familiar hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen, the only sound breaking the silence. I had come back early from the office, earlier than usual. But something about today felt off, like I was stepping into a moment I wasn't supposed to witness. I found her in the living room, standing by the tall windows, her back to me. She hadn't heard me come in. For a second, I just watched her. The way her fingers tightened around the fabric of the curtains. As though she was holding on to something fragile. She moved slowly, deliberately, drawing the thick velvet curtains shut, blocking out the last of the light. The room seemed to darken instantly. The faint glow from the streetlights outside casting strange shadows on the walls. She didn't turn to face me, didn't acknowledge I was there. But I could see her shoulders tense, as though bracing for something she knew was coming. "Mom," I said softly, not meaning to sound so harsh. But it came out anyway, that edge I hadn't meant to put there. She froze for a split second, and then, as if nothing had happened, she turned toward me. Her face smooth, her eyes unreadable. "You're early," she said, her voice cool but strained. "I wasn't expecting you for another hour." I couldn't stop myself from glancing back at the curtains. "Why did you close them?" I asked, already feeling the tension in the air, like a question I didn't want to ask, but knew I had to. Her gaze followed mine to the curtains, and for a moment, she looked almost guilty. She turned quickly, her smile quick and forced. "It's just too bright in here," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "Thought you might prefer it a bit darker." But I knew better. It wasn't about the light. It was about hiding something, about the truth she was desperate to keep from me. I walked closer, my steps slow and deliberate, and I could feel her eyes on me. Her gaze tracking my every move. "Is there something you're hiding?" I asked. I didn't know where the words were coming from, but they felt right. The air felt thick, like something was about to break. For a second, she didn't answer. The silence between us grew heavier with each passing second. The space between us thick with things we both knew but hadn't spoken aloud. Then, finally, she spoke. Her voice was low, barely above a whisper. "Your father will be home soon," she said. Her words laced with something I couldn't quite place, fear, maybe, or caution. "I don't want to upset him, not today." It was the first time she had ever said anything like that to me. I didn't know how to respond, so I just stood there, staring at her. The weight of her words lingered in the air, unanswered. What was she trying to protect him from? What was she hiding from me? I felt a flash of anger, the kind that always came when something didn't add up. When pieces of the puzzle didn't fit. "You don't want to upset him?" I repeated, my voice growing sharper. "What about me? What about what you've been hiding from me?" She looked away, her hands fidgeting at her sides, something flickering across her face, regret. Maybe, or guilt. But it was gone so quickly, I wasn't sure I had even seen it. "I'm doing this for all of us," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm trying to protect what we have." But I wasn't sure anymore if she was protecting us or if she was protecting herself from the truth that was slipping through the cracks. Just like the light that she had blocked out behind those curtains. At that moment, I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. The gravel crunching under the tires. My father was home. She glanced at the clock, her eyes wide for a brief moment, before she quickly plastered that familiar smile back on her face. "He's here," she said, smoothing her hands over the front of her blouse. "Let's keep this between us, okay?" I didn't respond. I couldn't. The weight of her words, of the things she wasn't telling me. settled into my chest, suffocating me. As the door opened and my father stepped inside, I saw her mask slip back into place. The smile returned, the warmth, the carefulness in her voice. But I could see through it now. I could see the lies beneath. I didn't know what she had closed those curtains for, but I knew one thing for sure. Everything was about to change. The silence between us had been broken, and now there was no going back. The evening stretched long in the house. The air thick with an unspoken tension I couldn't shake. I sat at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly scrolling through my phone. Though my mind wasn't on the news or the messages. My eyes kept drifting to the living room, where the curtains remained drawn. It had been hours since I first saw her close them. And the image stuck with me, the way she'd stood there, hands gripping the fabric, blocking out everything outside. It was a deliberate act, a choice she had made without a second thought. I didn't understand it at first. Why shut out the world, the light, when nothing had changed? But now, as I sat in the kitchen, I realized it wasn't about the light. It was about control, about keeping something hidden. Something she didn't want either of us to see. The way she had locked everything away in that room, sealed it in with the curtains, made me feel like an outsider in my own home. It made me feel like there was something I wasn't meant to know. Something she was desperate to keep from me. The sound of my father's car pulling into the driveway snapped me from my thoughts. His arrival was always like a ritual, a return to normalcy. Even if the normalcy was built on cracks I could no longer ignore. I felt a lump rise in my throat as I heard the door open. His footsteps heavy on the hardwood floors. My stepmother's mask of calm, the smile that always came too easily, was already in place as she walked toward him, greeting him with warmth, a perfect performance. She asked how his day was, her voice light, and I could see the practiced way she listened. Her focus entirely on him. I stayed where I was, my hands clenched on the phone, knowing I should speak up, say something. Confront her, but the words wouldn't come. What could I say? Could I really shatter the fragile facade they had built? Could I accuse her of hiding the truth, knowing full well that the truth had already slipped between the cracks? It was then that I noticed her glance toward the hallway. Her eyes flickered toward the stairs, where I was sitting in the dim light. I couldn't read the expression on her face, but for a split second, I saw something there. Something familiar. Fear? Panic? Whatever it was, it vanished the instant she turned back to my father, flashing him that same smile. She leaned in, kissing him on the cheek like everything was fine. Like we weren't standing on the edge of a cliff, one step away from a fall. My father smiled back, the warmth in his eyes genuine. But there was a cloud in the room now, something I couldn't escape, no matter how hard I tried. I felt the weight of it, pressing down on my chest. I wasn't sure how long I sat there. But when I finally stood up and made my way to the living room, I felt a coldness in the air. The curtains were still drawn, just as she had left them hours ago, and the house felt smaller, suffocating in its silence. I didn't speak to either of them that night. I couldn't. What was there left to say? The lies had already settled in the walls, wrapped up in the soft shadows of the curtains she had drawn so carefully. I wanted to shout, to scream at her for the things she had hidden from me, for the truth she thought she could protect. But as I sat there, staring at the darkened windows, I realized something. She wasn't just hiding from my father. She was hiding from me, too, from what I had already started to see. And maybe, just maybe, I was hiding from her. When I finally went to bed that night, the house was still. Too still. I closed my eyes, but the image of those curtains, pulled tight against the outside world, stayed with me. A small, tight knot of unease formed in my stomach. Something was wrong. Something was about to break. But for now, it was hidden, shrouded in darkness, just behind those curtains. And I had no choice but to wait for the moment when it would finally spill out. The days passed in a blur, the space between us shrinking with each silent meal, each strained conversation. It was as if we were all playing a part in a story no one wanted to be a part of, trapped in the roles we had accepted. Pretending that the curtains my stepmother had drawn so carefully were still keeping everything outside. But they weren't. The light, the truth, was slipping through the cracks. And I could feel it, the tension thickening, the air growing heavier. I found myself becoming more aware of her, the way she moved through the house, the way her eyes flickered toward the door whenever it opened, as though she was waiting for something, or someone, to step inside. It was the little things, the subtle shifts in her behavior that told me she was just as aware of the walls we had built around ourselves. There was something different in the way she held her shoulders, tight and almost defensive. The way she always looked away when I entered the room. It was one evening, just after dinner, that I saw it again. She was standing in the hallway, her back to me, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the closed door. The curtains in the living room were drawn once again, and there she was, staring at the window, as if trying to decide whether or not she should open it. For a brief moment, I thought she was waiting for me to say something, but I didn't. I couldn't. The words felt too heavy on my tongue. Instead, I watched her, feeling the distance between us grow, knowing that the silence we were both living in was only widening with each passing day. Finally, she turned, her gaze meeting mine. There was no smile this time, no mask to hide behind. Just a fleeting look, one that held something I couldn't understand, perhaps regret. Perhaps something deeper. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words never came. Instead, she stepped away from the door, moving past me without saying a word. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding. She was hiding something. I could feel it in the air, in the way she moved, in the way she couldn't meet my eyes. I wanted to confront her, demand answers, ask her why she was hiding. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. What if I wasn't ready for the truth? What if the truth was something that would change everything? My father arrived home soon after, his footsteps echoing down the hallway, his voice full of the warmth and ease that had always accompanied him. She straightened up as he entered, that mask of composure slipping back into place. The door she had been so close to opening remained shut, as if she had closed off whatever part of herself she had been about to show me. I stayed out of sight, retreating to the living room where the curtains were still drawn, where the shadows seemed to linger longer than they should. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something that would unravel everything. And when it did, I wouldn't be able to look at her the same way again. The sound of their voices drifted into the room, soft, but too practiced. She asked him about his day, about the business trip. And he responded with the same level of affection, unaware of the cracks beneath the surface. I knew he didn't see it, didn't see how she was hiding behind those drawn curtains. Behind the perfect smile she wore only for him. And then, without warning, I heard her laugh, a soft, hollow sound that felt out of place in the room. It wasn't real. It wasn't a sound of joy or love. It was just a noise, a cover-up. An attempt to fill the space with something that wasn't the truth. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but as I sat in the living room, the weight of the curtains pressing down on me, I realized that I was no longer waiting for her to tell me the truth. I was waiting for the moment when it would spill out, whether we were ready or not. And when it did, I knew I wouldn't be able to turn away. The truth had already crept into the shadows. And there was no curtain thick enough to keep it hidden for long. The days dragged on, each one heavier than the last. And I found myself pacing through the house more than I ever had before. Every room felt suffocating. Each step I took felt like an intrusion into a space that was no longer mine. The silence between us, the space between me and her, had thickened into something almost tangible. Like an unspoken rule that neither of us could break. I couldn't stop thinking about the curtains. It wasn't just that she'd drawn them so carefully, blocking out the outside world. It wasn't just that the house had become a place of shadows and whispered words. It was that she was hiding something, hiding it from my father, from me, from the world. And I couldn't stop myself from trying to uncover it. One night, I stayed late in the study, pretending to work, my mind elsewhere. My eyes scanning the same paragraph for the 100th time. I knew she'd be up soon, knew she'd slip through the house like a shadow, checking on things. Making sure nothing was out of place. When the clock ticked past midnight, I heard her footsteps in the hallway, quiet and careful. The soft creak of the door, the rustle of the curtains, she was in the living room again. Closing them like she always did, her movements deliberate and practiced. I didn't move. I stayed where I was, hidden behind the shelves, waiting for her to finish. And when I heard her voice, low, murmuring to herself, I finally stood up. Moving silently through the hall toward the living room. The house was still, except for the distant hum of the refrigerator, and the air felt thick. Like something was about to break. She was standing by the window, the curtains in her hands, her back to me. I stood there for a moment, unsure whether I should speak. Unsure if I should let her finish what she was doing and pretend I hadn't seen. But something in the way she stood, so rigid and tense, made me take a step forward. "Why do you keep closing the curtains?" I asked, my voice quiet, though the question had been building in me for days. She didn't turn to face me immediately. Her hand tightened around the fabric of the curtains, her fingers pale and trembling. For a long moment, she didn't answer, and I thought maybe she hadn't heard me. But then, slowly, she turned, her expression unreadable. "You don't understand," she said, her voice softer than I expected. But there was a coldness to it, like a warning. "There are things you don't need to know." I felt a rush of frustration, of something raw and deep, stir within me. "What things?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "What are you hiding?" She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes dark, calculating. As if weighing whether to say anything at all. And then, as if she had made up her mind, she took a step closer to me. Her gaze not meeting mine. "You don't need to get involved in this," she said, her voice strained, barely above a whisper. "Just let it go. Let him handle it." "Handle what?" I pressed, stepping closer, needing to understand. But she just shook her head, a small, bitter laugh escaping her lips. "It's already too late." It was always too late. Her words hung in the air, like a clock ticking down to something inevitable. Before I could respond, before I could press her for the truth, I heard the sound of the door opening, the familiar, comforting sound of my father returning home. She froze, her hand still on the curtains, her face suddenly drained of color. "Your father's home," she said quickly, her voice returning to its calm, practiced tone. She turned back to the curtains, adjusting them as if nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just witnessed something break inside her. I stood there, frozen in place, as the door shut behind him. The sound of his footsteps growing louder as he made his way to the kitchen. My stepmother turned back to face me, her smile now a perfect mask once again. "Everything's fine," she said, her voice bright, too bright. "Nothing to worry about." But I knew everything had changed. Whatever she had been hiding, whatever truth had been buried behind those curtains. It was no longer a secret. And as I watched her move toward the kitchen to greet my father, I realized that the house, once a place of comfort, had become a prison, a place where the truth was locked behind closed curtains, waiting for someone brave enough to open them. And I knew, in that moment, I couldn't let it go. I couldn't let it remain hidden. But I wasn't sure how to tear down the walls she had built. How to shatter the silence we had both been living in. All I could do was wait. Wait for the moment when everything would finally spill out into the open. The days that followed were a strange kind of stillness, suspended between moments I couldn't hold on to and ones I couldn't ignore. My stepmother continued to move through the house with that same practiced ease. Her voice lighter, her smiles more frequent, but there was something hollow in them now. Each interaction with her felt like a performance I was no longer sure I could believe in. My father was none the wiser. He came and went, immersed in his work and his routine, never once questioning the tension that lingered in the air like a storm cloud that wouldn't break. They talked about trivial things over dinner, how his day had gone, the weather, the latest neighborhood gossip, but there was no mention of the unspoken truth that was hanging between us. He never asked why the curtains were always drawn or why my stepmother had become a stranger to me. Someone whose smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. And I couldn't stop myself from watching her. Every time I passed her in the hall or caught a glimpse of her in the kitchen, I couldn't help but notice the way her movements had changed. There was a tremor in her hands now, a tightness in her posture, as if she was constantly bracing for something. It was the smallest things, her eyes darting toward the door when she heard a car pull into the driveway, the way she flinched when the phone rang, the subtle shift in her expression when she thought no one was looking. It was as if she was always waiting for something to happen. Then one night it happened. My father had gone to bed early and I was still up, sitting in the living room with a book I wasn't really reading. The house was quiet, too quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I heard her footsteps approaching, soft and deliberate, and then she appeared in the doorway, standing there like she wasn't sure whether to stay or leave. "You're still up," she said, her voice neutral, but there was an edge to it now. Like she was testing me, waiting to see how I'd respond. I closed the book and set it aside, my eyes meeting hers. There was a moment of silence between us, but this time, it felt different. The air between us was charged, and I could feel the weight of everything unsaid pressing in. "I don't know what you're hiding," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. But it felt like a scream. "But I'm not going to pretend anymore." Her face tightened, her jaw clenching slightly. "You don't need to know," she replied, but there was no conviction in her words this time. No assurance that everything was fine. "I've kept this from you for a reason. I'm not a child anymore," I said, standing up now, my body trembling with the force of the words I had been holding in for so long. "You can't keep pretending like I don't see it." Her eyes flickered, and for the first time in months, I saw something crack in her, something raw, something human. Her mask faltered, and I could feel the weight of the truth rising between us, thick and suffocating. "You want the truth?" she asked, her voice shaking now. She took a step closer, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. The fear that had been there all along. The truth is that I've been living in a lie for so long that I don't even know who I am anymore. The truth is that I didn't want to hurt you, but I couldn't tell you. Not when everything was already falling apart. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. Then why didn't you tell him? I asked, the question finally slipping out, the one I had been too afraid to ask until now. She looked away, her gaze flickering toward the door. Because I was afraid of what it would do to him, she whispered, her voice so small now. I was afraid that if he knew, he would leave. The silence that followed was suffocating. The weight of her words settling over me like a shroud. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to fix this, how to make sense of what had been broken between us. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how betrayed I felt. How I had been living in the shadows of her lies for so long. But instead, I just stood there, the anger slowly draining away. Replaced by something else, something darker. I don't know what to do with this, I said finally, my voice hoarse. I don't know how to live in this house anymore. Her eyes softened for a moment, but she didn't reach for me, didn't try to make it better. She simply nodded, the weight of everything between us pressing down on us both. I don't either, she whispered. And for the first time, I realized that we were both trapped in this house. Trapped by the secrets that had been buried behind the closed curtains. By the lies that had held us together for so long. In the end, the truth didn't set us free. It only left us standing in the rubble, unsure of who we were anymore. Unsure of where we went from here. And as I turned to leave the room, I knew that the house, this house we had both lived in for so long, would never be the same. Again, the curtains would never hide the truth. The silence between us would never be enough to cover the cracks that had begun to form.